Welcome everyone to our webinar dealing with the Design and Building Practitioners Act. It's certainly an interesting topic full of interesting considerations for strata schemes throughout New South Wales. My name is Philip Cooper and I am the head of strata governance for our group. I've just put up here for you an agenda for this session. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Michael, who will be joining us as a subject matter expert from Tagro Engineers. And throughout the session, I will lean on him to give some information to help us navigate through this topic. For those of you who may have questions throughout the session or already have questions you have thought of, I would kindly direct you to the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your session there. If you could type in your questions, and then what we will do is attend to those queries towards the end of this session. We have already received a couple of questions pre-session, so thank you to those who have sent us the queries. A bit about us as presenters. So as I said earlier, my name is Philip Cooper and I'm the head of strata governance within our group. The CNG property group comprises of 4 strata management brands that are listed here for you. The first being Jameson Strata Management, which was established in 1963. The second being CD Strata, which operates out of Wollongong, established in the 70s. And then we have Real Property Services, established in the 90s, and Cooper and Levy Strata Management, which was established in 2005. We're very proud to communicate with you all that our group does look after a large number of home unit owners, and we are committed to supporting our clients in being happier at home and tackling all matters strata. I'll just now refer to my presentation colleague, Michael, who will now introduce himself to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, and thanks for inviting me to join the webinar today. My name is Michael Labib. I am the director of Tagro Engineering Consultants. My email on the screen. If anyone have any further questions down the track, feel free to email me anytime. Tagro Engineering Consultants is an Australian engineering business. We provide building services engineering design, including mechanical, electrical, fire, vertical transportation, and hydraulics. We provide also engineering for civil engineering, remedial consulting services for Class 2 and mixed-use buildings, expert witness reports for litigations, and project management. Thanks again, Phil, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Michael. So on to the topic at hand, the Design and Building Practitioners Act. Sorry, excuse me, I've got my IT fingers a bit muddled there. Just as an overview of what this is all about, the Design and Building Practitioners Act relates to what we call Class 2 buildings. So that encapsulates most strata schemes in New South Wales, and it relates to works that fit certain criteria. Now, I won't read to you what's written here. You can do that yourselves, but essentially the overview or the flavour of this legislation is that the government wanted to ensure that jobs conducted to remediate strata buildings and in new constructions are effectively fit for purpose. So the main intention of this legislation is to make sure that if there is something that needs to be done, it is done correctly and hopefully done once. So this is really an effort to address historical scopes that were inadequate or incomplete. It is important to communicate also that the obligations for compliance with this legislation in fact sit with the contractor. So in order to comply with the Design and Building Practitioners Act, the key party who needs to comply is the contractor, not the strata managing agent, and not the owner's corporation or the strata committee. However, in all things, I guess, legal, there is also duty of care considerations that need to be made. And it's for this purpose that we, as strata managing agents, want to extend our duty of care to best inform our clients and our team of what the obligations are. So with any government rolled out obligations, there can be what we call exemptions. And exemptions are also very important to be across because they will form a large part of how we delineate between whether you do have to comply with this act or not. Regarding the obligations, a lot of the government material has really focused on new builds, but in strata management world, the main involvement for us clearly relates to remedial work in existing structures. So from our perspective, we need to understand a few key players here. First of all, there is the registered designer. So the person who is qualified to design what needs to be done, or I guess in more crude language, the scope of what needs to be done. Then, of course, as with all repairs, there is the builder. And Michael, the builder has a fancy title under this legislation, but what do we call the builder in this scope, in this world?
Building practitioner.
Building practice. Thank you. So the building practitioner is the builder, and they are the two key players in this process. So what happens is when there is a requirement for a scope, this scope needs to be registered. And the way it is registered is through a government portal by someone qualified to upload that information. Any work that is not exempt must follow this process. And that's a very important point. Now, what I might do here is perhaps pass to Michael as well, but just to talk about things that trigger obligations to comply. So the most generic summary is any work that is not covered under the exemptions. Michael, did you want to expand a bit on that and talk a bit about typical work that would trigger requirements under the DBPA?
Sure thing. I may look into the other screen while I'm talking, so just excuse me. So any works involved in a class 2 building or building with a class 2 component, like mixed use with a commercial at the bottom, for example. And the definition of works is any works within building element. A building element may be a fire safety component, a waterproofing component, or load-bearing component like structure or the envelope of the building, even including the windows and the doors. For example, if the window is not achieving the right waterproofing to avoid dampness, does not comply with the BCA, it will trigger that requirement. However, there is some exceptions, and the exceptions, as Phil mentioned, may include something minor like waterproofing in one unit. For example, if someone doing a bathroom upgrade and changing tiles or changing of kitchen layout, that will not trigger Design Practitioner Act requirements because you're only doing one unit. But if that defect is repeating throughout the whole complex in multiple units, that becomes Design Practitioner Act scope. I'll hand over back to you, Phil, but I'm more than happy to further elaborate on this.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's great. So as you can perhaps begin to appreciate, this legislation creates an extra set of steps that we all need to attend to as people involved in remedial works within strata schemes. But what I wanted to try and do was, I guess, simplify it to some extent so that we can work through it in a more efficient manner. And I like to use that phrase, the pub test. So really, when we consider how best to tackle this legislation, it's important to understand why the legislation was created. So Put simply, the government was perhaps overwhelmed with complaints about quality of build or suitability of remedial work. So what they wanted to do was create a framework of ensuring that works that are progressed are fit for purpose. So the rule of thumb here will continue to be, if there is a job that needs to be done over $5,000 in a Class 2 building, if exemptions do not apply, how do we best ensure that the job is done holistically and completely and done once? This creates a huge number of challenges because the traditional approach has always been something is broken, communicate that with the Strata managing agent. The Strata managing agent then goes to a trusted builder or builders to obtain quotes, and then the client selects one of those quotes to do the work. This new legislation turns that a bit on its head, because what will now need to happen is where the Design and Building Practitioners Act is triggered, there will be a need to have a design, or let's call it a scope, before you can proceed. Then that scope will need to be quoted against and then registered on government portals. So the initial obvious outcome of this is that certain works will have significant delays that were not previously anticipated. The other reality of this new legislation is that there will be, in many instances, an extra layer of cost, initial cost on the project, because to prepare a design costs, it costs time, therefore it costs money, and then to make a decision on that and to put it to tender, etc., also takes time. So there is a bit of a counter reality here where a job that needs to be fulfilled will now take longer to be fulfilled, and that could dovetail to other concerns such as complaints from consumers as to the time to get it done and potential risks according to timeliness of repairs. Again, we have to champion legislation and help have the best methodologies. So our counter comment to that is, well, if it takes a bit longer but it's done properly, then that is still a good outcome for the consumer. The other obvious challenge that we have already encountered to date is that even though the obligation for compliance sits with the builder, what was the fancy name, the building practitioner, the builder, quite often they may either not be aware of it, or they may view the obligation as simply a nuisance or a bothersome element of their daily life. So there have been instances where a small percentage of contractors are purposely not engaging with their requirements as well. And what that does is it creates a liability issue for all stakeholders. It creates an issue for the consumer because the consumer may be exposed to work that's not fit for purpose. It creates an unnecessary exposure to us as agents because we could then be criticised for not properly exercising our duty of care to you. So therefore, in terms of our office operations now, our team is continually being trained, but the main thrust that we would approach contractors with would be, if you do not believe that you need to comply with the Design and Building Practitioners Act, we need you to illustrate to us which exemption or exemptions you rely on under the regulations. And I guess the purpose of communicating this with you as our clients is to seek your support in that action, because in essence, if we are trying to protect your interests per legislation, we also want your support when we ask contractors to justify or substantiate why they are not complying with what they need to comply with. Michael, you may not have comments on this, but is there anything you want to add on that position? You don't have to, but if you wish to.
Well, challenges from a design practitioner perspective, given that we are design practitioners. The challenge that we face is, as per the regulations, we will have to have an overall look at the bigger picture, not just a single defect. The majority of the time, our clients call us to look into something very narrow. I just want to get this fixed. But the act will hold us liable for the bigger picture. For example, if you got a waterproofing defects in one balcony or a couple of balconies, this is more than likely to be similar defect in all balconies and also the roof. But when you engage us to look at, for example, balcony number 1, unit number 1 and 2, we will tell you, we'll get back to you, we think this may be a typical problem in the building, and it will become your, under Civil Liability Act, your duty of care. If you want to engage us to look at the overall picture, we will. If you don't, then we will only be liable for what you engage us to do. That just wanted to highlight this point. So back to you, Phil.
No, that's a very good point, and thank you for correctly confirming the Civil Liability Act. And with sort of all these acts we have to navigate through, and indeed that is a very important consideration. So what I wanted to now do is move to some frequently asked questions. We'll go through some that were pre-prepared, just to sort of re-emphasize the content that we covered up until this point. After we go through these frequently asked questions, we'll refer back to queries you may have raised throughout this session, and we'll address those along with the set of queries we received pre-session. So I guess just to reiterate or recapture things, the Design and Building Practitioners Act is something that allows for all stakeholders to ensure that the duty of care is carried out. So we're wanting to make sure that a job is fit for purpose and reasonable care is taken, and that future economic loss caused by defects is minimized. So as I said earlier, it's a situation where we're wanting to create a fit for purpose solution. Who is responsible for the DBPA? Is it with the contractor? Yes, it is. The contractor is the party that is responsible to comply with this legislation. Then, of course, the third topic, which really speaks a lot to our day in, day out realities in this process, and that is that if the responsibility is with the contractor, why is the owner's corporation or the agent getting involved at all? Well, as we said earlier, we do have that duty to you, and committees have duties to lot owners, and lot owners have duties to their asset to make sure that things are done in a way that is required. It's very important to note that it's not sufficient to simply say, well, it's the contractor's job. If they don't follow the rules, then it's all on them. Well, yes, it is on them, but it is also on other involved parties in the process to be across the requirements. They were the prepared frequently asked questions. I've also have here for your reference the main parts of legislation that speak to this topic. So just to talk to that quickly, of course, there's the Design and Building Practitioners Act, which is the act relating to the topic. Then we have the regulations, and within the regulations under item 13 is the list of exemptions for complying with the act. And then we have two other sections being the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, and a web link there for information through New South Wales Fair Trading. At this point, we will move to the Q&A. And of course, if you have any feedback, if you can pop it in the Q&A box, and we can deal with that as well. But initially, I wanted to speak to queries received pre-session. So the first one was from Manuel. Thank you for your query. And you sought clarification on the definition of a building element, and you provided some context to your query. Michael, did you want to talk to that one, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Again, I'll look to the other screen. So I read the exact definition from the Act, and I'll elaborate on this. So in the Act, the definition of the building elements, number one, for purpose of this Act, building element means any of the following: fire safety systems for the building within the meaning of the Building Code of Australia. So any component of the fire system is considered one of the building elements. Number 2, waterproofing. Number 3, an internal or external load-bearing component of the building that is essential to the stability of the building. For example, structure, any component of the structure, or part of it, even if it's just part, one beam, one column, one wall, including but not limited to in-ground and other foundations such as footings, floors, walls, roofs, columns, and beams. The next one is component of the building that is part of the building enclosure. And the building enclosure is the external envelope of the building, all the external walls, including the doors and the windows. The following one, those aspects of the mechanical, which is the ventilation, plumbing, and electrical services of the building that are required to achieve compliance with the Building Code of Australia. So even building services is included. The following one, other things prescribed by the regulation for the purpose of this section. For example, if you have a more complex situation, you may seek an advice from a design practitioner such as us in order to find out exactly whether it applies or not. The following one is just elaborating on the structure side of things. Above ground wall definition, which is obvious above ground walls, below grade walls, and building enclosure, which is the exact the external frame of the building, including the roof, external walls, doors, and windows. So, which is pretty much everything attached to a structure, if you think about it. So keep in mind that there is also a list of exemptions. So if the element is listed under the exemptions, then you don't have to worry about this Design Practitioner Act. What are these exemptions? I'll run through it quickly, Phil. The exemption are work that is carried out at the exempt development under the environment planning assessment. For example, if you got a council order or a court order or under the EPA assessment, except waterproofing, waterproofing issues definitely trigger design practitioner. So it's not even if you got a council order or a court order involving external facade or waterproofing, then Design Practitioner Act still apply. The next exemption is waterproofing in one unit. For example, if you are altering the kitchen or a bathroom of one unit as part of changing tiles or changing kitchen layout, that does not trigger Design Practitioner Act. But if you have a repeating waterproofing issue throughout more than one unit in the complex, then it will definitely apply. Also common areas such as roof. The next exemption is, again, council order, I mentioned that. Development control order also. Work that is exempt from Building Code of Australia under the planning assessment regulation. For example, if you're doing something that does not trigger a certification based on the Construction Code of Australia. Work that is repair, renovation, or protective treatment. So regular repairs that you do just to keep the systems in a working order will not trigger Design Practitioner Act. For example, if you are changing batteries for the smoke detectors or even changing faulty ones, that's normal repair. And the annual fire safety statement that you do to make sure everything is tested and working fine in terms of fire, that does not trigger. It will only be triggered if a load-bearing component, which important part of the fire system, is faulty or defective or need major repair. This is where it will definitely trigger Design Practitioner Act. So the rest is very generic. So I touched on the most important ones. Following back, reading more into the question, they said that I confirmed that proposing a wire mesh. one of the fair trading officers responded and they say, okay, this is considered a class 7A car park because basically this question was they want to build a wire mesh around an existing car park lot. Only wire mesh, no structure elements. This is how I understand it. So the response that he got back is this is not considered to be a building element, which is true, given that there is no change of the load on the existing structure slab. If the load is still the same, I mean, in terms of cars, you are not adding additional car parking where on a slab that was not designed for this, then yes, using everything as existing, just building a wire mesh around enclosure around your car spot is not as per the New South Wales Fair Trading Officer. Yeah. So again, but keep in mind that that official response you received from an officer must be forwarded to your strata manager for record keeping in case anything or litigation happen in the future and saying, okay, we need to prove that you got an approval to do this and exempt from the Design Practitioner Act, because it's not clearly mentioned in the Act that when you build an enclosure around an existing class 7A car park, you have an exemption. This is not clearly mentioned. Anything not clearly mentioned, you need to make sure that you have official letter or approval or exemption, whether it's from New South Wales Fair Trading Officer or from a design practitioner saying it does or does not apply. I think I touched base on most of the question. I'll hand over back to you, Phil, if you want to elaborate or go back to the next question.
No, many thanks, Michael. That's great. A very helpful answer. And thank you, Manuel, for your query. There was a fair bit of detail there, so I hope that that response has addressed things. If it has not, please do reach out to us and send us perhaps an email and we can explore that further for you. We've also received a pre-session query from Margaret. Thank you very much for your query. Essentially, you set out a few matters in your query. The first one was to get clarity as to whether a repair to the roof necessitated compliance with the Design and Building Practitioners Act. You made a comment that the repair included some non-waterproofing issues as well. And then you made reference to the total cost of works, which I understand to be below the $5,000 figure. What we might do is just focus on that part of the question first, because to my understanding, there are two main things to consider here. The first one is the waterproofing, and the second one is the cost of the works. So, Michael, did you have a comment on those two elements, or did you want to talk to that at all?
Yeah, waterproofing to a common area, as I mentioned before, is definitely triggering a Design Practitioner Act requirement. So any defect on a waterproofing on the roof, I understand that the way this comment or question is written is they're doing regular maintenance, like yearly maintenance. But you still, this is a common area and waterproofing is not exempt under the Design Practitioner Act. So again, you need to seek a design practitioner opinion here, but from looking at your question without going into too many details, yes, it's definitely applicable. You'll need a design prepared by a design practitioner, and the repair will have to be undertaken by a building practitioner, not a roofer. The licensed waterproofer will have to work under the supervision of a registered building practitioner.
Michael, would you say that this is a good example of how the worlds of pre-legislation and post-legislation collide? And by that, I mean that my reading of this is that there may have been a quote to progress what I would term patch repairs or patch work. But then if it was done in keeping with the requirements of the Design and Building Practitioners Act, it would be likely that the scope of the job would be far bigger than a $4,200 job. I mean, is that a fair comment? And if so, I think the client's concerns could be, well, does that mean that patchwork is now out the window and jobs have to be bigger than Ben-Hur? Do you get what I'm saying? So can you make a comment on that?
Yep, the cost is really irrelevant, especially when you're dealing with waterproofing in a common area, because it's clearly not exempt and will have to be done under the Design Practitioner Act.
Okay.
So the cost, let's put the cost aside. Why do you need a design practitioner to do it if it's a minor patch, in some people's opinion? Because the material that you're patching with need to be compatible with the existing material. There may be a reason why the existing material is deteriorating too fast and you have to patch it every year or every couple of years. That's why it may have to be, for example, and it may be a bigger job. Yes, you may have to remove the whole waterproofing membrane and apply a new one. It depends on the design practitioner assessment. And that's why if it's a load-bearing element, such as a structure and waterproofing and fire safety, those are the most important three, okay? And the rest is still important, yes, but there is a big highlight in the act around those aspects. So if it's anything to do with waterproofing membrane, more than one unit or in a common area, you will have to engage a design practitioner to provide an opinion. Preliminary assessment, they will come out to the site, they will look at it, they'll tell you if it's a minor repair, they still need to do a design for that minor repair, and it will have to be done by under the supervision of a building practitioner, by a licensed contractor. You don't need, as I said, the only case where you don't need design practitioners or building practitioners when you touch waterproofing membrane only, and the act is clear, only if you're doing works in one unit. I hope that answered.
Michael, thank you. For me, it certainly does. And again, I think it comes back to the do it once, do it properly intention of the legislation. So that does clear it for me. Thank you. The second part of Margaret's question, I think, is not so linked to the Design and Building Practitioners Act. You made mention of a building audit report, and you mentioned the 10-year Capital Works Fund plan. My understanding here is that you wanted to get clarity of whether you should use an engineer. I won't delve into it too deeply here, but just to give a quick response, I think that's a separate issue, not related to this legislation. But of course, the better qualified the person is who prepares a 10-year plan, it could even be a quantity surveyor, the better detail you will get. Of course, that will also dovetail into the more expensive the report will be. But again, if there are further questions following this session, please do reach out to us. The third part of your question related to the uploading of documents and drawings. So I'll answer this in the context of a job that is being dealt with under the Design and Building Practitioners Act. You've asked, what exactly does the engineer need to do in these cases? Well, Michael, I'll come to you in a moment, but just quickly, my understanding is that the design will need to be prepared, and then within a certain period of time, it will need to be uploaded onto the government portal. And that needs to be done by a qualified person. It can't just be done by someone not registered with the government. Does that cover it off, Michael, or any further comments there?
Yes, I'll go quickly through the steps. So step one is the registered design practitioner need to undertake a preliminary site visit to assess the defect. Step two, invasive inspection or test may be required and arranged by the design practitioner to find out the root cause of the problem. Step three, prepare regulated design with stamped drawings and issue design declaration as per the Design Practitioner Act. Step four, those documents shall be uploaded to the New South Wales Planning Portal by a principal design practitioner, which we are, or a building practitioner, or the third option, but it's not recommended, that the body corporate can register with the New South Wales Fair Trading as a corporate building practitioner, but you don't have authority to build. It's just for the purpose of uploading documents only. You don't need to do this. If you had a builder already engaged to do the works, he can upload this, or your principal design practitioner can upload it for you. I don't see a benefit for a body corporate to register. Step five, undertake site visits during construction and provide reports at preset hold points and identify if there is any defects or deviation from the design, because if there is, the design practitioner will have to liaise with the builder to provide variations to those designs. Documents will have to be uploaded again onto the portal. prior to builder complete the works that's deviated from the original scope. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just now move to the questions we have received during the session. We received a query from Jose. Thank you. Your query says that it relates to kitchen or works in a kitchen for a scope of works. And you've asked where and who do I need to make sure they have correct and appropriate licenses? I think this question sits slightly outside this topic, but the quick helpful answer I could give is that if you are engaging a contractor, in their quote, they should record their license number. And then you can go to the New South Wales Fair Trading website and do a license check to check that they are indeed licensed to do the work that you wish to engage them to do. If you are unsure of whether their listed licenses comply, you can phone Fair Trading to have some guidance in that. The second question we have talks to, well, I'll read it out. It says, is this new requirement triggered by remediation works on the land surrounding the building? And the questioner says, I own a flat in a building that is built on an escarpment beside water, and the escarpment is subject to erosion. So I appreciate all the considerations there. They say then we will be submitting a DA and any number of government agencies will be involved to give a development consent. Would this kind of work trigger the DBPA? On face value, I think the answer is yes, but Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong.
Well, if that part you're talking about is connected to the building structure and becomes or defined as building element, then yes. But if it's completely isolated from the building and there is no direct connection between that component and the building, hence it's not a building element in a Class 2 building. So the Design Practitioner Act will not apply if there is no clear interconnection between these two, the building and
okay.
Yeah.
So Michael, just to confirm, if the works are not touching or connected to the building, then no.
Yeah, it's external works to the building, non-related or not directly connected to the building structure, then the Design Practitioner Act will not apply. But if it's connected one way or another, then it may need further assessment.
Thank you. We then have a query, does replacement of existing windows in all units and common areas trigger DBPA in a 1960 strata building?
Yes, for
yes.
external windows. External windows.
The answer is yes. The next question we have, how does DBPA deal with remedial works for poor quality, I think it means quality work that may be several years old? So I think that's talking to what does the DBPA or how does it get involved for something that is fairly old? Now, several years old, I will interpret as meaning before the legislation. And I would assume that if it was before the legislation, it doesn't deal with it, but I'm happy to be corrected.
I'm not sure if I understand the question right, but my understanding, if there is remedial works already being undertaken prior to the Act, and those remedial works are defective, then will this contractor be liable under the Act or not? I think yes, because now in our expert witness work, our clients engage us to prepare expert witness report for all buildings, for all defects that's being done and pre-existing before the regulation come to life. So the law will hold these builders, even though it's a remedial builder, yes, we'll hold them accountable for any defect, and there's further passes on how you want to proceed with this. You may engage a design practitioner to prepare an expert witness report, or go back to that remedial builder and ask him to come back and rectify. It depends on how long the warranty they've given to you as well.
Thank you, Michael. And the next question we have says that you mentioned the obligation for compliance is on the contractor. Are there any obligations imposed on members of the Strata committee? Again, here, I can't give legal advice, but I think that would just speak to duty of care provisions. Anything you want to add to that, Michael?
Yeah, so the Civil Liability Act says if you've been made aware, directly or indirectly, of a problem in your building or your unit, you are liable under the duty of care, and you should take all the necessary steps to mitigate or fix that defect. That's your liability, basically. And for example, if you know the problem, you engage the expert then is liable to investigate that defect and is liable to prepare the designs. That's why we have professional indemnity insurance and public liability, and we're registered. The government do audits on our design as well. So we are responsible from the day you engage us to look at the defect. But if you know there is a defect and you ignored it, you are liable. Yes.
Thank you very much. The next question was to put the legislation and other resources back on the screen, so I've done that. We also have a query from Matt saying, when does the Act apply from? Existing buildings prior to the Act commencing, question mark. So I think in two parts, when does the Act apply from, and how does that impact existing buildings? I think in the second part, it applies based on the need to comply unless there's an exemption. And Michael, did you want to talk to when the Act commenced?
Yes, so look, I'll have a look here quickly. It commenced in 2020, July, I believe. Hang on a second, I'll get the exact date. All right, Act 2020 number 7 enacted as of 1st of July 2021.
So the answer there is 1st of July 2021.
Yes, but it has a backward effect. If there is any class 2 buildings that's built prior to that date that are defective, you engage an engineer to assess the defects, and you may be able to sue the builders, even though they built it before that act.
Oh, many thanks. That's great information. And the next question, does the Act apply to mixed-use commercial and residential company title properties? Well, my understanding is that it does apply to mixed use if there is a residential component. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, if there is any class 2 component, then it does apply.
And the next question relates to company title properties.
If it's not class 2, you need to have a look at the classification in your construction certificate.
Okay, so the answer there is if it's not class 2, then it does not apply. The next question is, would electrical upgrades worth over $150,000 requiring class 1 design fall under the Act?
By the sounds of it, it sounds extensive. It's not a minor repair or a regular repair that you do every year just to keep the system in normal shape. It looks like this upgrade is triggered by either defect or a development, like extension, addition, alteration, or whatever it may be. Then yes, it will trigger the Design Practitioner Act. You'll have to engage electrical registered design practitioner. Yeah, feel free to reach out to us if you want any registered design practitioners. This is what we do.
Thank you very much. And the next question, I think, relates more to prioritizing works. It says, are there time limits enabling or accommodating higher priority works to commence first, allowing less urgent matters to be translated into and committed through a 10-year capital works plan? I'm not quite sure I understand how that links to this legislation. I mean, an owners corporation can certainly schedule and prioritize works. My understanding, though, is that if the works in question trigger the obligations of the Act, then there should be compliance with it. Michael, any comments there?
Yeah, look, it's subject to the assessment of the design practitioners you engage. If it's critical or emergency repair, that of course it can't wait for a 10 years period. It depends on the assessment and the engineer's opinion. If the engineers think that those repairs or this kind of work can wait that duration of time, or you can do it after 7-10 years, then yes. But if the engineer's opinion, this is an emergency repair, then it has to be done, then it has to be done. And if it's not done, it becomes the under Civil Liability Act, a duty of care.
Thank you. We have about 6 more questions that have come in. I'll just answer 2 more, and the balance of questions we will reach out to people with the recording with the answers, just in the interests of time. The question that I see here is, what are the consequences if general minor waterproofing repairs have been done in the last month without involving, I think you're referring to without adherence to the DBPA? I mean, what are the consequences? I guess that's for the government to be able to enforce what the consequences are. Michael, do you have any understanding of what those powers are?
Well, if it fails or further defects keep appearing, your insurance most likely is not going to cover you, because the first thing they will ask is, when have you done this repair, and have you engaged a design practitioner or a building practitioner? So if any further defects, even like third party, for example, damage to your neighbor or something, it may not be covered under insurance. That's the only risk you carry, really. So also, if a structure damage further happened and it came to a court attention, they will treat it as civil. Once you're aware, again, that the measure here, or the question is, once you're aware of the issue, have you taken considerable care or action to mitigate any further damage? If the answer is yes, you have taken steps, then all good. If you haven't taken steps while you know, then it becomes a liability issue.
Thank you, Michael. And a nice, tidy question to close out with. As I said earlier, the balance of questions we will reply post-session, but this is a nice, tidy one. The question is, what qualifies as a Class 2 building?
Well, that's a really good question. So the definition of Class 2 building is apartment buildings where people live above and below each other. It may be also a single-story attached dwellings with a common space below, like a basement or parking. That's the definition of Class 2. Back to you, Phil.
Many thanks, Michael. So just in closing, a big thank you to all those who have attended. And as I said earlier, the balance of questions we may not have addressed will be addressed post-session. And we look forward to you joining us in 2023 for future webinars. And in the interim, wishing you all a very safe and relaxing break over the Christmas New Year period. And Michael, thank you again for your expertise in this session. Thank you all again, and I'll end the session now. All the best.